Hello, and we're here to talk about how far can we go with the cloud. To help me discuss that, I have Chris Bailey, who is the co-founder and CEO of File Catalyst. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
And Richard Cranefield, who is head of portfolio Playout at Red Bee Media. Welcome as well. I think it'd probably be good for our audience just to hear your background and background of your company in relation to cloud technologies. So perhaps you could provide that for us.
Sure. So as we know, cloud's been a big buzzword since 2010, 2011. Things really started to pick up. A lot of applications have migrated into the SaaS platform, into the cloud. And along with that, the data needs to follow. So it has local access to the data. So one of the big obstacles as file transfer acceleration providers, being File Catalyst, we have is to move that data as fast as possible from an on-premise storage or location into the cloud so that we enable the end customers to take advantage of the cloud storage like S3 or Microsoft Azure and fully leverage the SaaS platforms that they're migrating to these days.
Right, and I guess that's in relation to the fact that we're talking large files.
Absolutely. There is tools that are provided by the public cloud providers in order to migrate data, but they're all based on legacy technologies like HTTP. So what we do is we provide our proprietary acceleration technology to move it in several times faster than the traditional tools would.
And Richard, you're more in the services domain in that respect.
Yes, so at Red Bee we're a managed services provider servicing a number of high-profile broadcasters, and really as a services provider taking on responsibility for complex operations and technology for our customers. Essentially we've been a cloud for our customers for a long time. With the emergence of kind of public and private cloud technologies, we're now looking at how we use these new innovations in order to change the services that we offer our customers, become more flexible and more agile.
Right. And tell me, what would you say are the sweet spots of cloud deployment? Where do you get the maximum benefit from cloud technologies?
I think for us, for a start, cloud means many things to many people. There's public cloud deployment of software as a service technologies, and for us as a larger scale company, we're also exploring what private cloud and the deployment of generic infrastructure in our own data centers means. For us, public cloud means an ability to experiment and try new things out with very little commitment to any of the underlying architecture, and then seeing how we migrate those experiments that work into private cloud and even appliance-based technologies.
Thanks for that. And Chris, what applications do you see the cloud bringing maximum benefit in terms of the activities you undertake?
Well, being, again, file transfer, we typically encounter it's cross-vertical. So anybody that just want to move that massive data in doesn't really matter. So medium broadcast is huge because the video file sizes with from HD to 4K and moving into 8K HDR, the file sizes are exploding. So just being able to move that to leverage those SaaS-based transcoding, that sort of thing, you have to get it in there faster. So, but across other verticals as well. So the sweet spot really is anybody that has big files, which is everybody these days.
And could they be files used in both production and distribution applications?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. It doesn't matter. The software that's being now SaaSified in the cloud these days is, it does we can do everything in there. So from post-production to production, it doesn't really matter.
Sure. And have we reached the limit now? Are we where we want to be, or is there more to come?
I think we started off, it was very chaotic and it was a buzzword and should I move to the cloud? I think like any system, it's going to come to an equilibrium. Yeah. And I think we're approaching that point where right now the cloud adoption is it's very fast. It's almost like the hockey stick, but I think it's going to level off to a point where it's more linear. And policies mandate that some data needs to stay home, some needs to go to the cloud because of security concerns and that sort of thing. So I think at some point you're going to see a balance. We're not sure what the percentage will be. For different organizations, it will be different, but I think we're getting to a point where we're going to know roughly what's going to remain in the cloud for this vertical and what's going to remain on-premise.
I recently suggested that cloud might be one of the new technologies to talk about, but people came back to me and said it's already maturing some of it, so that's the key. And Richard, I mean, you mentioned very briefly that you've got a mixture of public, private, on-premise, off-premise. Tell us a little bit about the decisions about deployment.
I think for us, it really comes down to looking at a particular task. How long are we going to have to carry out that task for? How much of it are we going to do? And what's the total cost of ownership of it? If you're going to do something or you want to experiment with new technologies, then the public cloud is a great place to do that. As we start to see that we're reaching a particular volume of carrying out a particular task, whether it's archiving or transcoding or even some playout activities now, once we start doing something a lot, then it starts to make economical sense to move that back down to the ground and use some private cloud infrastructure or even appliances to do that task if you're doing it over and over. But public cloud is really a place where we can exploit the ability to burst the amount of capacity we have as an organization without taking the risk of over-provisioning technology and then finding that we don't use it because that business doesn't come in. So I think we'll end up with, as we start to mature our use of public cloud and private cloud, we'll end up with a mixed ecosystem of using all of these technologies where they make technology or technological or economic sense to do so.
And I guess when you've got a high degree of deployment, it might be well worth investing yourself in the technology because you're going to get good utilization out of it.
Absolutely, yes. It all comes down to the economics of utilization. If you're doing something all the time, then maybe public cloud isn't the place that you should be doing that task. Having something on the ground that is dedicated to doing that task can make more economic sense. But if you need to burst capacity or you have unpredictable demands on that capacity, then public or private cloud infrastructure still has a role to play.
Yeah. And if I could come back to you, Chris, I mean, your company does a great job of getting the most out of a pipe, if you like, and getting the best transfer rates or whatever. But what about the pipes themselves? What kind of capacities have we got? How's that going to evolve over time?
Well, right now it seems like, at least in media and entertainment, the threshold is right around the 10 gig mark. Right. But over the next few years, I mean, out of necessity, if you want to get enough data from point A to point B in a certain amount of time, it just becomes impossible to do at certain speeds. So I think we're going to see 40 gigabits become a little more prevalent. Now, what about the links is causing the bottlenecks? I mean, that's the traditional problem that we've always solved, and that's the whole latency problem with the TCP, not being able to send enough data to keep your pipe full while it's recovering from loss and that sort of thing. So we just happen to do that very efficiently. But as you get higher speeds and higher volume, that even a small amount of latency really limits the speeds that you can get. So, and that's why the technologies provided by these public cloud providers, being HTTP based, become even more of a bottleneck as we move forward with higher bandwidth and higher volume of data.
So it's not just about the bandwidth, the latency is a key
parameter.
The
latency, well, the thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that your data is as close to your applications as possible, so the latency is minimized at least. And but that said, File Catalyst, if you have to move stuff into a cloud from a disparate region in Europe, maybe to the US, then we're able to overcome that regardless of the location.
Richard, latency, does that sort of come on your horizon as an issue?
Yeah, I mean, so my area of focus is primarily linear playout, and in that we're dealing with a need for very low latencies, and we're still dealing with very, very high bandwidth streams when we're using uncompressed video. We're 1.5 gigabits per second. So the need for low latency and very high bandwidth in some of the systems we're building at the moment really means that moving that type of thing to the public cloud just isn't feasible yet. And so we're looking at private cloud deployments for that. But as we start to use compressed video streams, smaller files, then public cloud for ad hoc services is something that we're looking at provisioning for some of our customers.
And you act as a service provider. What are the kind of motivations that go through your customers' minds to say, we'll come to you rather than do it ourselves?
I think, with public cloud and SaaS technologies, there's new companies at these shows every year. And so there is that temptation for some of our customers or potential customers to explore doing things for themselves. But really, as a managed service provider, our job is to take on the technical and operational responsibility of tying lots of different technologies together and keeping channels on air or keeping archives available and allowing our customers to focus on their core business, which is typically curating or creating content and managing their audience. And so even with the emergence of different cloud and software as a service offerings, there's still a need to tie those things together and figure out how that works as a wider ecosystem, and that's where our value still lies, is in being able to integrate all of these different technologies.
Thanks, Richard. And that's very interesting because that's where your value lies. Where does File Catalyst's value lie in terms of what you offer to your customers?
Well, again, it's if you want to be able to fully leverage the software as a service in the cloud, you have to have your data close. So it's more in the migration.
Right.
If you've created your data in the cloud along with your services, then that's not a problem. But it's for customers that need to migrate into the cloud. They have a lot of data. They've used on-premise software, but they want to move part of their day-to-day operations into the cloud, take advantage of those utility-type licensing schemes and software as a service monthly billing and the OpEx model. They need to get their data in there, and it has to be done in a feasible way, and they're dealing with massive amounts of data. So in order to maximize their investment, then they need to get the data in there faster. And sometimes the content, it's produced on-premise and needs to go to the cloud as well. So it's not just archive data that might need to move, it's new incoming data as well, from event venues, from archives. It all just needs to be moved in as fast as possible.
And as we said earlier, that we should almost be talking about cloud as almost a mature technology. Is it just a continuing evolution, or are there any big steps coming up that you can envisage that are going to change this whole ecosystem? Is it just a continuous maturing of the technology?
To me, I think it is. It's going to be continuing to mature, and I think we're just going to see companies experimenting with more pricing models, utility type billing, monthly type billing, and shifting away from the traditional on-premise perpetual licensing model, so that you can pay, as Richard was saying, pay as you go. If you have a production or an event and you have one, 3 months from now, you don't have to pay for something you're not using in the meantime. So I think it's going to be, a lot of software vendors moving to that model, and I think that's going to be the evolution. It's just more of it is going to happen.
Changing business models.
Changing business models, and it's going to be a difficult time for some customers to do that.
Richard, what do you see, just in closing, do you see on the horizon?
I think there's still a lot of potential. There's a lot of traditional vendors that we see here at the show, and they've got a lot of work to do in moving to new ways of purchasing their technologies and migrating those to be able to use them on private or public cloud infrastructure. I think there's areas of our business that we've already moved a lot of it to public cloud. So we do a lot of post-production, we do a lot of media asset management and archiving into the public cloud. There's areas that are still ripe for moving a lot of more experimental services into the cloud. So I think there's still a lot to come from just using cloud for experimenting and trying new ideas of how technology can be used, or new business models.
Guys, thank you very much for your time. This is a very exciting development, and looking forward to seeing more. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.